In the bustling halls of a San Francisco tech fair, a moment unfolds that changes everything. Ethan Reynolds, 45, a robotics CEO with a mind built on logic and a heart long buried under ambition, notices two boys trying to fix an old robot, one eerily similar to the one he once designed in college. But it's not the robot that stops him in his tracks. It's the crumpled drawing tucked beside it. To Dad, from Mom, the note reads, scrawled in handwriting he hasn't seen in nearly a decade. It matches the style of the only woman he ever truly loved. Haunted by a letter he never received and a past he thought was behind him, Ethan sets out to uncover the truth. What he finds is more than just lost love. It's two sons he never knew he had, and a chance to become the father he never dared to imagine. But when legal challenges threaten to tear them apart, Ethan must fight not only for custody, but for redemption. Will a man who built machines finally learn how to repair hearts? Subscribe now to follow this emotional journey of reunion, resilience, and the power of second chances. Ethan Reynolds had built a kingdom out of circuits and code. At 45, he was the brilliant, elusive mind behind Cintiq Robotics, a global tech juggernaut headquartered in San Francisco's shimmering glass skyline. From the outside, Ethan's life was textbook success, private jets, keynote speeches, and a net worth that fluctuated with the stock ticker. But if you peeled back the polished image, what you found was a man whose victories were soldered together with loneliness. He stood near a booth at the Bay Area Tech Expo, politely disengaging from a conversation with venture capitalists. Behind the smile and casual nods, his mind spun elsewhere. Updates to the SRT AI line, the backlog in R&D, a merger proposal still sitting on his desk unread. The usual. Then, something unexpected pulled his focus. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw two boys, perhaps 8 or 9, crouched near an abandoned table. They were fiddling with a small, battered robot. The model was old, nearly obsolete. But what stopped Ethan cold was the design. He knew that robot. He had drawn it years ago, during his senior year at Stanford. A personal prototype, never mass-produced. He hadn't seen that design since Julia. His heart stuttered. Ethan stepped closer, quietly, observing. One boy held a soldering pen with the confidence of someone who'd burned his fingers before and had learned from it. The other read instructions aloud, carefully turning wires in place. "I think if we rewire the sensor line, it'll stop spinning in circles," the reader said. "That's what you said last time," the other replied with a grin. A piece of paper rested beside them. Not standard tech notes. A drawing. Ethan bent slightly, unable to help himself. "To Dad, from Mom," it read in a handwriting that made his breath catch. The sketch was rough but familiar. A robot holding hands with two stick-figure kids. The message was underlined with a red crayon heart. Ethan blinked hard. That exact phrasing had once ended a letter from Julia Jensen, his first love, the woman he'd loved and lost 9 years ago when his ambition had overtaken his heart. He hadn't heard from her since. Just a single letter she'd sent out of the blue, back when Cintiq first hit the NASDAQ. He hadn't opened it. His assistant at the time, Rachel, had deemed it non-essential. It had gone into a drawer, forgotten, until now. He crouched slowly. "Hey there, that's a cool robot. Where'd you learn to fix something like that?" The boys looked up, startled but not frightened. The one with the soldering pen smiled. "We found it at a garage sale. Mom used to work with robots." The other boy tilted his head. "She said this one was special, from someone important to her." Ethan's voice came out softer than he intended. "What's your mom's name?" "Julia," the second boy answered. "Julia Jensen." It was like the air left the room. Ethan's heart pounded so loud he could hear it echo behind his ears. He knelt down fully now, eye level with them. "And you two are—" "I'm Aiden," said the soldering boy proudly, "and that's Leo. We're twins." He saw it now. How hadn't he noticed? The angular chin, the deep-set hazel eyes, his eyes. The resemblance punched him in the chest. "And where's your mom now?" he asked gently. Leo glanced down. "She works a lot. But today, she's home. She's tired lately." The innocence in his voice tightened a knot in Ethan's throat. "Can I?" He paused, forcing the words through the storm in his mind. "Would it be okay if I talked to her? Just to say hello?" The twins looked at each other, then at him. Aiden studied him a beat longer before nodding. "Sure. We live nearby. But Mom doesn't like strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Ethan said, and the words cracked faintly. "Not really." As the boys packed up the robot and the crayon sketch, Ethan followed them, his mind spiraling through the years, the choices, the silences. Every step toward their small apartment building felt like unearthing a time capsule, one he'd buried under layers of ambition and neglect. And at the top of that capsule, still folded and unopened in a drawer somewhere, was a letter with a heart at the bottom. He had no idea what he was walking into. But for the first time in years, Ethan Reynolds was walking toward something that mattered more than anything he'd ever built. The walk to the apartment was only 5 blocks, but to Ethan Reynolds, it felt like crossing a lifetime. The boys led the way through bustling sidewalks, chattering about gear ratios and servo motors with the kind of unfiltered enthusiasm only children carried. Ethan tried to keep up, nodding quietly, heart pounding with every step. They turned onto a narrower street in the Mission District, past a faded mural of children holding books and stars. The buildings here were aged, weathered by time and circumstance. Paint peeled from balconies. A stray grocery cart lay tipped in front of a cracked stairwell. It was a part of San Francisco Ethan hadn't seen in decades, if ever. "We live up there," Leo said, pointing to the 3rd floor of a narrow walk-up. Ethan looked up at the rust-stained railing, then back at the boys. "Is your mom okay with guests?" Aiden shrugged. "She likes polite people. Are you polite?" "I try to be," Ethan replied softly. They bounded up the stairs, and Ethan followed slowly, unsure what he would say, how she would react if she'd even recognize him. Leo knocked twice, then shouted, "Mom, we're back, and we brought someone." There was a pause, a soft shuffling of feet, then the door opened. Julia stood there, tired but unmistakably her. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a loose bun. There were faint circles under her eyes, and she wore a faded hoodie that might have once been navy, but her expression, her shock, was immediate. "Ethan?" she whispered, hand tightening on the doorknob. "Hi, Julia," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's been a while." She blinked hard, as if expecting him to disappear. "What are you doing here?" He faltered. "I met your sons. At the expo. They reminded me of someone I used to know." Julia let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, almost a cry. "They get into everything." Ethan glanced at the boys, now unpacking the robot on the floor. "They're brilliant," he said. "They rebuilt something I drew 20 years ago, and then I saw the note." Julia's face tightened. "I didn't know, Julia. About the letter. About them." She folded her arms, leaning against the doorframe for support. "I sent it to your office, a week before they were born. I figured it was the least I could do, give you a choice, but your assistant called, told me you weren't interested in hearing from me." Ethan's eyes widened. "Rachel? She said you were too focused and not ready for that kind of distraction. I didn't want to beg." He took a shaky breath. "I never saw that letter. Never heard anything, and I should have called. I should have checked. I just assumed." "I know," Julia said gently, exhaustion laced in her tone. "I assumed things too." They stood in silence for a moment. years of unspoken words hovering in the air like storm clouds. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small and tidy. The living room doubled as the boys' workspace, robot parts neatly arranged on the coffee table, wires tucked in bins. A laptop with a cracked corner sat on the couch. On the wall hung drawings, kites, robots, a family drawn with 3 stick figures. No fourth. Ethan scanned it all quietly, his throat tight. "You've done an incredible job," he said at last. "They're kind, curious, brave." "They're my life," Julia replied, "and they're growing fast." Ethan looked at her genuinely. "I want to help. I don't know what that looks like yet, but if you'll let me, I want to be here. For them. For you." Julia didn't respond immediately. Her eyes wandered to the robot the boys were fixing, its head bobbing as they tested a joint. "I'm not asking you to rewrite the past," Ethan continued, "but maybe we can redraw the future." She turned to him, a flicker of old warmth crossing her face. "Start with dinner," she said. "We have instant noodles and a broken microwave." Ethan chuckled, the sound awkward but real. "Let me guess. You've taught them how not to burn the water?" She smirked. "Barely." As he stepped into the cramped kitchen, Ethan rolled up his sleeves and took the first real breath he'd had in years. It was faintly scented with soy sauce and solder, but it felt like home. The kitchen was small, just enough space for a stove that hummed unevenly, a narrow sink, and a countertop cluttered with half-used spice bottles and 2 mismatched mugs. Ethan stood awkwardly in the middle of it, holding a packet of instant ramen like it was a foreign artifact. From the living room, Leo's voice rang out, "Don't let him burn it, Mom." Julia chuckled softly from the hallway. "No promises." Ethan read the directions twice, then turned on the burner. He wasn't sure why his hands were trembling. Maybe it was the weight of the moment, or the years he'd lost. The hiss of the flame steadied him, a reminder that some things, like boiling water, were still in his control. Julia leaned on the doorframe, watching. "You really never got the letter?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "I would have remembered every word." She sighed, folding her arms. "I believed her, your assistant. I thought she was protecting your ambition, maybe even your pride." "She was protecting something," Ethan muttered bitterly, "but not anything that mattered." They stood in quiet again, broken only by the occasional bubble in the pot. Ethan stirred the noodles, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "You should have called me," Julia said, not accusingly, just quietly. "I know," he admitted, his voice heavy, "but I didn't think I deserved to. I'd picked my path, and I figured maybe you picked yours." "I didn't pick anything," she whispered. "I survived." That word pierced deeper than he expected. Ethan turned off the burner and poured the noodles into 2 bowls. "This is terrible, by the way," he said, placing one on the counter for her. "I forgot the seasoning packet." She laughed, an unexpected sound that filled the room with something soft and familiar. "It's fine," she smiled. "The boys say bland is healthier anyway." They sat at the counter, sharing silence and soggy noodles. Across the room, the boys were still tinkering, a pair of tiny engineers shaping their world from scraps and wire. "I've missed everything," Ethan said finally, voice cracking. "Birthdays, first steps, their first words." Julia reached across the counter and placed a hand gently over his. "But you showed up," she said. "Not all fathers do." The front door creaked open a moment later as Aiden popped his head in. "We need help. The servo's stuck again." Ethan stood instinctively, wiping his hands on his slacks. "Let's take a look." They spent the next hour huddled on the floor. Ethan surrounded by tiny screws, twisted cables, and the relentless curiosity of 2 boys who only paused to ask if he had a flashlight or more duct tape. "I think the motor's burnt out," Leo said thoughtfully, examining the robot's arm. Aiden nodded. We need a new one. Maybe we can ask Santa. Ethan smiled. Or maybe we can check my garage. I might have something even better. Their eyes lit up in unison. You have a garage full of robot parts? Leo asked breathlessly. I used to build for fun, Ethan admitted, before I built for money. Aiden tilted his head. Why'd you stop? The question caught him off guard. Because, somewhere along the way, he said quietly, I forgot what fun looked like. Leo turned back to the robot. Well, you can borrow ours. Julia watched from the couch, something soft flickering in her expression. Later, as the boys dozed off on a pile of blankets, robot pieces scattered around them like dreams in the making, Ethan stayed behind to help Julia clean up. He folded a towel slowly, his hands unsure. They're amazing, he said. Every little part of them. I know, Julia replied. Do they know about me? He asked carefully. Julia paused, then nodded. I never hid you. I just couldn't explain why you weren't there. Ethan swallowed hard. I'd like to try now, if they'll let me. You'll have to earn it, Ethan, she said gently. They've learned to live without a dad. If they let you in, it'll be because you showed up. Again and again. I will, he said without hesitation. Every time. Julia gave a faint, bittersweet smile, then glanced at the clock. It's late. I should get them ready for bed. Ethan took a breath. Do you want help? She looked at him, really looked, and nodded. Yeah, that would be nice. And for the first time in years, Ethan Reynolds didn't feel like a guest in his own life. Morning light filtered through the faded curtains, casting soft beams across the worn floorboards. Ethan stood at the edge of the tiny living room, watching Aiden sleep curled up against a pillow that had clearly been mended more than once. Across the room, Leo snored lightly, one arm wrapped around the base of the broken robot like it was a stuffed animal. Julia walked in quietly, a steaming mug in each hand. You didn't have to stay, she said, offering him one. I didn't want to leave, Ethan replied, gratefully accepting it. I couldn't. They sipped in silence for a moment, the kind that feels less like absence and more like understanding. Ethan's eyes didn't leave the boys. I don't even know what their favorite color is, he admitted quietly, or if they like pancakes or waffles. I missed so much, Julia. You can still learn, she said, sitting beside him. But don't try to cram 10 years into one day. It'll overwhelm them. And you. He gave a small nod, eyes misty. What if I get it wrong? You will, Julia said gently. We all do. That day, Ethan didn't return to his office. Instead, he accompanied Julia and the boys to a local flea market where electronics parts were often salvaged from old toys and discarded gadgets. It was chaotic and dusty, but the boys navigated it like seasoned explorers. Uncle Todd once found a drone battery for $2, Aiden bragged, holding up a battered walkie-talkie. Ethan smiled, watching as Leo bartered over a rusted gear motor. He knelt beside them, joining their search, unbothered by the grease on his hands or the grime under his nails. For the first time in years, his expensive watch didn't feel like the most important thing on his wrist. Later, at home, they sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by a growing pile of parts. The boys argued, collaborated, and theorized like junior engineers. Julia cooked in the background, occasionally calling out advice or warnings about loose wires. Ethan leaned over a sketch Aiden had drawn of a new robot design. This arm could use more support, he noted. What if we tried a triangular brace? Aiden blinked at him. You know, robotics? Ethan chuckled. A little. I used to build models when I was your age. Leo looked up, tilting his head. Did your dad help you? The question hit harder than expected. Ethan set down the wrench slowly. I didn't really have one around, so I had to figure it out myself. Both boys were silent, as if processing that rare piece of honesty. Then Aiden handed him a wire spool. Well, you're helping now. That simple declaration was more than forgiveness. It was an invitation. Over dinner, the boys launched into rapid-fire questions. What's your favorite movie? Do you know how to skateboard? Have you ever flown a drone through a tunnel? Ethan laughed through each one, delighted and overwhelmed by their boundless energy. Julia watched quietly, her heart both aching and swelling. She saw the shift. Ethan wasn't playing father. He was becoming one, slowly, messily, and sincerely. That night, after the boys were tucked in, each insisting Ethan stay until they fell asleep, he joined Julia on the back steps of the apartment building. The air was crisp, stars barely visible above the city glow. "You've always been good with kids," she said softly. "I've never had to be," he replied. "But now, I can't imagine not trying." Julia looked down at her hands. "There's something we should talk about." Ethan turned to her, concern rising. "What is it?" "I haven't been feeling well," she admitted, her voice low. "I've been to the clinic. They think it might be respiratory complications. It's gotten worse lately." Ethan froze. "Julia." She shook her head quickly. "Don't panic. I'm managing it. But it's why I reached out to a lawyer last week. Just in case." The weight of those words landed like stone. "You're preparing for something I should have been here for from the start," he said bitterly. "You're here now," she replied, her voice quivering. "That's what matters." Ethan reached out, gently placing a hand over hers. "Then let me be part of the now, however you need me." Julia's eyes filled, but she didn't pull away. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to lean into his warmth, into the possibility that she might not have to do everything alone. Behind them, a soft voice broke the moment. "Mom?" Aiden stood at the screen door, rubbing his eyes. "I had a bad dream," he mumbled. Ethan stood first, extending his hand without hesitation. "Come on, buddy. I'll sit with you until you fall asleep." The boy hesitated, then nodded sleepily and took his hand. As they disappeared inside, Julia remained on the steps, tears spilling freely now. Tears of fear, of hope, of everything in between. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Julia's condition, once quietly manageable, had begun to intrude. The coughing spells that had previously only struck at night now caught her off guard in the middle of the day. Still, she kept her movements steady, her smile unwavering, especially in front of the boys. But Ethan saw. He saw it in the way she braced herself before lifting groceries, in the way she leaned on the counter when she thought no one was looking, and, most of all, in the fear she tried so hard to hide. One afternoon, while the boys were occupied reconstructing their robot's arm mechanism with spare parts, Ethan gently pulled Julia aside. "We need to talk," he said softly. Julia looked at him, her face pale under the kitchen's overhead light. "If this is about me going to the doctor again—" "It's not a suggestion this time," Ethan interrupted gently but firmly. "You're not okay, and pretending you are doesn't help anyone, not Aiden, not Leo, and not you." Her shoulders sagged, the facade momentarily slipping. "I don't have insurance, Ethan. The clinics help, but specialists are a luxury. Every cent I earn goes to rent, food, or school supplies. If I disappear into a hospital, who's going to take care of them?" "I will," Ethan said without hesitation. Julia stared at him. "You don't even know what cereal they like yet. Then I'll buy every box until I figure it out." She laughed softly, the sound tired but genuine. "I mean it, Julia," he said, stepping closer. "Let me do this. You've done everything alone for so long, but you don't have to anymore." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint sound of Leo yelling, "We need more duct tape," from the other room. Finally, she nodded, slowly. "Okay, but only if we tell them together. That evening, as the boys sat on the couch, still sticky-fingered from peanut butter sandwiches, Julia knelt in front of them. Ethan sat beside her, his presence a quiet anchor. "Mom's going to the hospital for a little while," she said carefully. "Just for tests. Maybe a few days." "Are you sick?" Aiden asked, eyes wide. "I just need some help getting better," she replied. "And while I'm there, Ethan is going to stay with you." Both boys turned to Ethan, expressions unreadable. "Will you know how to make grilled cheese?" Leo asked skeptically. "I'll practice tonight," Ethan promised solemnly. Aiden looked at his mom, then at Ethan. "Will you still be here when she comes back?" Ethan leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "Yes, Aiden. I'll be here, as long as you need me." Julia reached for their hands, and all four sat in a circle of quiet strength. The next morning, Ethan drove Julia to UCSF Medical Center. She wore her best sweater, the one with tiny moth holes under the arms. She kept the window rolled down, letting the wind distract her from the tightening in her chest. "Thank you," she murmured as the hospital came into view. "You're not alone anymore," Ethan reminded her. Before she stepped out, he handed her a folded paper. "The boys drew something for you." Inside was a crayon sketch, a lopsided robot holding hands with two smiling stick-figure boys. In bold letters it read, "We're building a new heart. Come back soon." Julia pressed it to her chest, tears finally breaking free. Back at the apartment, Ethan stood in the kitchen, surrounded by pots and pans like a soldier preparing for battle. The boys watched him with cautious amusement. "What are you making?" Leo asked. "Grilled cheese, hopefully." Aiden squinted at the stovetop. "You turned on the wrong burner." Ethan cursed under his breath and switched it quickly. Despite the chaos, they ate together that night, laughing through charred edges and rubbery cheese. And when bedtime came, Ethan sat at the edge of their bunk bed, reading a chapter from a dog-eared sci-fi novel they adored. Just before lights out, Aiden whispered, "Do you think Mom will be okay?" Ethan nodded, his voice thick. "She's the strongest person I know, but even strong people need help sometimes." That night, alone in the quiet living room, Ethan couldn't sleep. He opened Julia's folder of paperwork, bills, school reports, old letters, and found something folded at the back. It was a drawing, a robot. Detailed, hand-sketched. At the bottom, "Our family robot, with a heart." The style was his. The lines, the angles, the way the joints were shaded. He had drawn something like this in college years ago and showed it to Julia one summer night in their dorm. She had laughed and said, "Even machines need love." She had kept it, used it to teach their sons. Emotion washed over him, sharp and stunning. All these years he thought he'd chosen the world over love, but love had waited for him in quiet sketches and duct-taped dreams. He picked up the phone and called his lawyer. "I need to talk about temporary guardianship," he said. Because Ethan Reynolds wasn't going to disappear again. The following week passed like a blur of microwaved dinners, math worksheets, and bedtime stories read under the dim light of a second-hand lamp. Ethan had never been so exhausted, or so determined. Each morning began with the same chorus. "Do we have clean socks? Where's my robot arm part? Can we eat cereal and grilled cheese together?" Ethan, once the man who engineered robotic limbs with microsecond reflexes, now stood in front of a tangled mess of shoelaces and peanut butter jars, learning the delicate art of showing up. He had underestimated this role, not just the logistics, but the emotional weight of filling in for a mother, for Julia. Every night after the boys were asleep, he'd call the hospital for updates. Julia's condition had stabilized, but recovery would take time. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, though her lungs had suffered more than she let on. On the third day, Julia finally picked up his call herself. "Hey," she rasped weakly. "Hey, you," Ethan replied, standing on the apartment balcony, one hand on the railing, the other clenching the phone tighter than he meant to. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better," she said, a tired laugh slipping through. "The food's terrible. Nurses are saints, though. The boys, how are they?" "They're good. Leo tried to build a motor-powered spoon this morning. I caught Aiden giving it a test run on spaghetti. The wall may never recover." Julia chuckled, then coughed. "I miss them." "They miss you too," Ethan said gently. "But they're okay. We're managing." There was a pause. Then she whispered, "Thank you. For everything." Ethan didn't reply right away. He let the silence speak what his throat couldn't. Then softly, "I should have been here sooner." "I know," Julia said, "but you're here now." He held on to those words like a rope in deep water. The next weekend, Ethan took the boys to the Exploratorium, a hands-on science museum that Julia used to take them to once a year, when she could afford the discounted passes. This time, Ethan handed the cashier his black Amex and said simply, "3 tickets, full access." Inside, Aiden and Leo darted between exhibits with wide-eyed wonder. They dragged Ethan toward the robot lab, where a miniature humanoid was being programmed to sort blocks by color. "Look!" Leo shouted. "That's what we were trying to build." "Except our robot threw everything in the trash can," Aiden added. Ethan knelt beside them, watching as their excitement poured out in fast words and tangled thoughts. The staff at the lab smiled as the boys animatedly explained their design. One of the volunteers, a college student named Mika, knelt next to Ethan. "They're sharp. You work with them on robotics a lot?" "Starting recently," Ethan said. "They're important to me." Mika grinned. "You should get them into our Saturday workshop. Kids build their own bots from scratch. It's life-changing." Ethan looked at the boys, grinning, chattering, thriving, and something settled inside him. "Yes," he said, "I think we will." That night, after the boys had fallen asleep mid-cartoon, Ethan tiptoed into the kitchen and sat alone, reviewing a new pile of documents sent over by his lawyer. Julia had signed the medical guardianship forms. That was step 1. But a complication had arrived, a letter from someone named Martin Green. Ethan frowned as he read the words. Petition to assume custody in the event of Julia Jensen's incapacitation. Claimant: Martin Green, biological uncle. Reason: concerns over long-term fitness and emotional stability of temporary guardian. Ethan stared at the page, pulse quickening. Julia had never mentioned extended family, and this man was trying to claim the boys? He called the number listed on the letter. The voice that answered was cold and clipped. "Martin Green. This is Ethan Reynolds," he said steadily. "Julia's friend. I'm currently caring for her sons." A pause. "Ah, the ex-boyfriend. She mentioned you once. I didn't expect you'd still be around." "I didn't expect you'd show up at all," Ethan replied. "I have legal standing. Family court will see it that way. I filed for custody." "Why now?" Ethan asked, voice tightening. "Where were you when she was working night shifts to keep them fed?" "I have my reasons," Martin said dismissively. "But know this, I don't think a man like you, with your background and reputation, should be near those kids." Ethan didn't answer. He hung up. His hands trembled. The boys were in the next room, asleep, dreaming of circuits and rockets. He had just found them. He wasn't about to lose them, not again. He called Julia. She picked up on the second ring. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly. "Do you trust me with them? If this goes to court, I need to know you believe in me." There was no hesitation. "With all my heart," Julia said. Ethan closed his eyes, breath shaking. "Then I'll fight." Because no matter what Martin Green thought, Ethan wasn't just a visitor. He was building a life. One sandwich, one science exhibit, one bedtime story at a time. The sun hadn't risen yet, but Ethan was already seated at the kitchen table, fingers threading through his hair as documents lay spread out before him. Legal forms, medical updates, a list of witnesses. The glow from the hallway nightlight barely reached his spot, but he didn't need light to feel the weight in his chest. He hadn't just stumbled into a father's role. He'd been thrust into a legal storm. Martin Green, the boy's distant uncle, had filed for emergency custody. The hearing was set for next Friday. Ethan had exactly 5 days to prove that he wasn't just some tech CEO playing house. He was the man worthy of staying in their lives. When Julia called that morning from the hospital, her voice was steadier, though still wrapped in fatigue. "I heard from the social worker," she said carefully. "Martin filed, didn't he?" "He did," Ethan confirmed. "He's trying to make it seem like you're unstable and I'm unfit." Julia sighed bitterly. "He hasn't spoken to me in 8 years, Ethan. He didn't even send flowers when my mother passed, and now he wants to take my boys?" "Don't worry," Ethan said, his voice firmer now. "I'm putting together our case." "I just hate that it's come to this," Julia whispered. "The boys shouldn't have to go through another loss." "They won't," Ethan said, his hand instinctively tightening around his coffee mug. "I'm going to fight for them, and I'm not doing it alone." Ethan's team at Reynolds Robotics had known him as many things: brilliant, demanding, intimidating, but never vulnerable. That changed Monday morning. Instead of leading the executive meeting, Ethan stood in the center of the open-plan design floor, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, a folder tucked beneath his arm. "I need your help," he began, eyes sweeping across his stunned staff. He told them everything, about the boys, the surprise discovery, Julia's illness, and now the court battle ahead. Silence followed, thick and uncertain, until Rena, his head of PR, stepped forward. "Whatever you need," she said. And just like that, the room softened. People moved. Plans formed. By noon, Ethan had a digital slide deck highlighting his involvement with the boys. School drop-offs, medical appointments, video clips of robot builds, even footage of him burning pancakes. Leo's giggles in the background unmistakable. Rena worked on framing the narrative. Not just redemption, but responsibility. "You didn't just find them," she said. "You chose them." Ethan looked at the screen showing a still image of him reading bedtime stories while both boys leaned on his shoulder, half asleep. "I did," he said quietly, "and I won't unchoose them." The night before the hearing, Ethan tucked the boys into bed a little earlier than usual. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside their window. Aiden curled beneath his rocket blanket, staring up at Ethan. "Tomorrow's the day, huh?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but you don't have to worry about that. You just be kids. I'll handle the court stuff." Aiden hesitated. "What if they take us away?" "They won't," Ethan said immediately, though his voice wavered slightly. "I promise." Leo peeked from his bunk. "But what if they don't believe you're our family?" Ethan sat on the edge of the lower bed, looking between them. "You know," he began softly, "when I was your age, I built my first robot out of soda cans and paper clips. It could barely move, but I kept fixing it. Not because it worked, but because I believed it could." He leaned closer, heart aching. "That's how I feel about us. I didn't get everything right at the start, but I'm learning, every day, because I believe we can work, as a family." Leo reached out and placed a tiny hand on Ethan's. "I believe that too," he whispered. The courtroom was stark, but packed. On one side sat Martin Green in a stiff blazer, lips pursed in practiced concern. On the other, Ethan, flanked by his attorney, a stack of statements, and behind him, an entire row of unexpected allies. Julia's nurse, the school counselor, a robotics instructor, even Rhina, who had taken time off just to be there. Ethan stood when called. His palms were sweating, but his voice was steady. "Your Honor, I never knew I had sons until a few weeks ago, but the moment I found out, everything changed. I've walked out of million-dollar meetings for school runs. I've burned breakfast, patched robot arms with duct tape, and read bedtime stories until I had no voice left. I may not have started with them, but I'm here now." He paused, then added, "And I'm not going anywhere." Martin's attorney stood next, calling him emotionally impulsive and citing inexperience with children. She tried to paint Ethan as a man trying to clean up an image. But then the boys entered, escorted by a court advocate. Leo walked straight to the judge. "Your Honor," he said seriously, his tiny hands clenched. "Our mom got really sick, and we didn't know if we were going to have a family again. But Ethan, he came." He looked over his shoulder at Ethan and smiled. "He fixes things. He fixed our robot. He fixes burnt noodles. I think he's fixing our family, too." The courtroom went still. The judge folded her hands, studying Ethan. "Mr. Reynolds, are you prepared to legally apply for guardianship should the children's mother become unable to care for them?" "I already did," Ethan said, producing the forms. "This morning." There was a long pause. Then, at last, the judge nodded. "Temporary custody is granted to Mr. Reynolds, pending full guardianship review." Court adjourned. Cheers didn't erupt, just the quiet sound of two small boys racing across the floor to throw their arms around the man who had chosen to stay. The apartment was still when Ethan returned with the boys that evening. Aiden darted toward his sketch pad while Leo pulled open their Lego robot bin, launching into imaginative reconstruction as if the courtroom drama had never happened. But Ethan stood frozen at the threshold. Temporary custody. A phrase that sounded both promising and fragile, like something that could disappear with a single stroke of a pen. He closed the door gently behind him, the weight of the day pressing into his shoulders like sandbags. "Dad," Aiden called casually from the couch, as though the word had always been his. Ethan blinked. It wasn't the first time they'd called him that, but tonight, after everything, it landed differently. He turned, slowly, his chest tight. "Yeah, buddy? I think our robot needs new arms. Want to help?" And just like that, the courtroom faded. The worry, the doubts, all of it. Ethan crossed the room and sat beside him, picking up a plastic wrench. "Let's fix him up," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. Later that night, after stories had been read and toothbrushes had been fought over, Ethan tucked the boys in and turned toward his own room, but something about the silence tugged at him, Julia. He hadn't spoken to her since before the hearing. With a deep breath, he pulled out his phone and hit the hospital's number. The nurse recognized his voice and transferred the call. "Ethan," Julia rasped, her voice softer than he remembered. "You should be sleeping," he said gently, leaning against the doorframe. "I couldn't. I needed to know. Did it go okay?" "It did," he replied, his voice catching slightly. "They're safe, with me." A long pause filled the line. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "I knew you'd show up. Eventually." He let out a quiet laugh. "I'm sorry it took so long." "We don't always get to pick our timing," she said weakly, "but we do get to choose what we do with it." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "How are you feeling?" "Some days are harder. Breathing is harder. But hearing their voices, that makes it better. They talk about you constantly," Ethan said. "Leo says you used to make banana pancakes shaped like robots." Julia chuckled faintly. His favorite. "I tried once," he admitted. "They came out looking like alien waffles." "Progress," she teased. They stayed on the line, not speaking, but not hanging up either. just listening to the soft sound of each other breathing. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's life reshaped itself. Morning routines replaced boardroom calls. School pickups replaced conference briefings. He learned the difference between snack-friendly carrots and boring carrots. He could now braid hair, badly, and had learned what it meant when Aiden got quiet during dinner, math anxiety, and when Leo suddenly started lining up toys, too much caffeine in the afternoon. At work, his team adjusted. Meetings became more intentional. His assistant, Grace, blocked off dad hours in his calendar. "You okay with this?" he'd asked her once. Grace had simply smiled. "Sir, watching you become human is the highlight of my year." One afternoon, Ethan brought the boys to Julia's hospital for a surprise visit. Her eyes lit up when she saw them, arms open despite the oxygen tubes. "Mama!" Leo cried, climbing carefully into the bed. Aiden followed, gentler, pressing his cheek against her arm. "Guess what?" Aiden said proudly. "Dad built a robot with us, and it works." Julia looked up at Ethan, her eyes glassy with emotion. "You're doing it," she said quietly. "You're giving them what I prayed they'd have." "I'm trying," he whispered. "You're succeeding." The boys chatted about their projects while Julia held their hands, savoring every word, every moment. Ethan watched, memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her fingers brushed their hair, how her gaze lingered on their eyes as though afraid they'd vanish. When it was time to go, Leo clung to her, reluctant. "Will you come home soon, Mama?" Julia hesitated. Her smile was tender, but her eyes shimmered with tears. "I'll come home every night, in your dreams, and one day, when you close your eyes, I'll be right there with you." Ethan gently pulled Leo close as the boy buried his face in his jacket. Aiden stood stoic beside them, holding Julia's hand a moment longer before whispering, "I'll make the pancakes next time." Back at home, the boys were quieter than usual. Dinner went mostly untouched. Even cartoons didn't stir a laugh. That night, as Ethan dimmed the lights, Leo called out softly, "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Are you scared too?" Ethan hesitated at the doorway. "Yeah, sometimes," he admitted truthfully. Leo turned on his side. "But you stay, anyway." Ethan walked back and knelt beside the bed. "That's what dads do." Leo nodded slowly. "Then I'm not scared anymore." Ethan kissed his forehead, then stood to leave. But Aiden, from the top bunk, added something quietly. "Mom says we got your heart now." The words struck him like lightning, soft, sure, and irreversible. Ethan turned back one more time, voice shaking, "And I've got yours." 3 weeks had passed since the custody hearing, and in that time, Ethan Reynolds had experienced more firsts than he had in decades of running a robotics empire. He burned the first pancake he made for breakfast, got lost on the way to a school field trip, and cried, quietly but openly, when Leo fell asleep in his lap mid-sentence, trusting him completely. But this morning, a storm brewed, not in the skies but in the form of a legal summons delivered to his door. Julia's uncle, a distant relative Ethan barely remembered Julia mentioning once in college, had filed a petition for full custody of the boys. The document rested on the kitchen counter like a landmine. "He claims you're exploiting the kids for sympathy," Grace read aloud, frowning, "and that your history with Julia disqualifies you from being a stable guardian." Ethan's jaw clenched. "He hasn't seen them in years." "He doesn't care," Grace replied calmly but firmly. "This isn't about them. It's about control, and probably money." Ethan glanced toward the living room, where Aiden and Leo were building a cardboard castle with hot glue and glitter. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury. "I won't let him take them." By afternoon, Ethan had already assembled a legal team, but he didn't want lawyers to fight this battle alone. This wasn't about contracts or loopholes, it was about his heart, and the two boys who had become the center of it. "Build me a timeline," he told Grace. "From the day I met the boys to now. Photos, drawings, everything. I want to show the court the truth, not just say it." She nodded, already typing. "We'll build your case like we build a robot, with evidence, with intent, with love." That night, as the boys worked on a tiny solar-powered rover for their weekend science fair, Ethan watched them quietly from the hallway. Aiden had become more confident in his designs. Leo had started writing his own code, tiny lines, but working. They didn't know what loomed. He didn't want to ruin their joy. "Dad," Aiden called. Ethan stepped into the room, feigning lightness. "Yeah, engineer? Does this wire go here?" He sat beside him, gently nudging the wire into place. "You're close," he said, "but remember what I taught you. Connections matter." Aiden nodded, and Leo giggled. "Like when Dad forgot the eggs for pancakes." "Exactly," Ethan grinned, though his heart ached. Everything works better when you're present. 2 days later, Ethan stood in a packed family courtroom, Julia beside him in a wheelchair. Her frame had grown frail, her skin almost translucent, but her eyes burned with fire. The uncle's attorney rattled off reasons why Ethan was unfit. He was absent for years. He's too wealthy to relate to children. He never married their mother, and their relationship was short-lived. Julia coughed softly, motioning to speak. The judge nodded. "Miss Jensen, do you wish to testify?" She did, and when she did, the room stilled. "Ethan didn't know I was pregnant," she said. "I wrote him. I tried, but he never got the letters. I found out recently his assistant, who no longer works for him, intercepted them, said he was too busy." The judge furrowed her brow. "He's made mistakes," Julia continued gently. "So have I. But he has never made the mistake of walking away from the boys since he met them. He didn't choose fatherhood at first, but now he fights for it daily." The uncle's lawyer interrupted. "But has he proven he can be a parent?" That's when Aiden stood up, without prompting, without fear. "I can tell you," he said, voice small but steady. "He didn't know how to do pancakes or braids. He still can't do shoelaces right." The room chuckled, but he listens, and he hugs tight, and he cries when we cry. That's what dads do, right? Silence. Then Leo stood up beside his brother. "He fixed our robot," he said softly. "So we think. Maybe he can fix Mom's heart too, if it breaks." Tears brimmed in Julia's eyes. Ethan looked down, overwhelmed. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Reynolds, would you like to say anything before I make my decision?" Ethan rose. "I've built some of the most advanced robots in the world. I've presented at global conferences. I've led thousands of engineers." He paused, voice shaking. "But I have never been prouder of anything than I am of the small, beautiful, complex lives of Aiden and Leo. They are my future, not because they share my name, yet, but because they share my soul." He looked at Julia. "She trusted me once. I broke that trust. But now, she trusts me again, and I will not fail her or them again." The judge took a long pause. Then, softly, "This court grants continued and full custody to Ethan Reynolds, with the strong recommendation that he formalize adoption proceedings as Julia Jensen's legal proxy upon her passing." Julia exhaled with relief. Ethan grasped her hand. The boys rushed forward, arms around Ethan's waist. "I told you," Aiden whispered. "You fixed it." Ethan knelt, pulling them into a full embrace. "No," he said quietly. "You fixed me." The days following the courtroom decision passed in a kind of quiet reverence. There were no parties, no grand celebrations, just small moments of peace that felt like miracles to Ethan Reynolds. Julia's hospital bed had been moved into Ethan's guest room, which the boys promptly declared Mom's new command center. They decorated the walls with their drawings, robots, rockets, and a stick figure family with the words, "Now whole." Ethan checked on her gently every morning, often finding her already awake, staring out the window. "I never thought I'd see this view," she whispered one morning, her voice paper-thin. Ethan sat beside her, handing her a warm mug of tea. "You earned it," he said, softly but firmly. She shook her head with a bittersweet smile. "No, I just held on long enough for someone to catch us." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The catch had changed him as much as it saved them. Later that week, a soft knock interrupted Ethan's early morning routine. Aiden stood in the doorway, pajamas rumpled, holding something wrapped in tissue paper. "What's that, buddy?" Ethan asked, setting down his coffee. "I made it for Mom," Aiden said quietly. "Can we give it to her together?" Ethan took the fragile bundle and nodded. "Let's go." Inside, Julia looked weaker than she had days before. Her breaths came slower, her eyes more sunken. But when she saw Aiden, her face lit with exhausted joy. "I have something for you," Aiden said, unfolding the paper. Inside was a tiny clay sculpture, an abstract shape of a robot holding hands with a smaller figure. "It's us," Aiden said proudly. "You, and me, and Dad." Ethan's breath caught. Julia touched the sculpture with trembling fingers. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "So are you." Aiden leaned in and kissed her cheek. "We love you, Mom." Ethan turned to hide the tears in his eyes. By Friday evening, Julia's decline became noticeable even to the boys. Leo crawled into bed beside her while she slept and whispered stories into her ear, about their science fair, about Ethan burning toast again, about how Aiden finally beat him at chess. "She hears me," he said confidently. Ethan nodded. "I think she does too." Later, when the boys had fallen asleep, Julia opened her eyes again. Ethan sat beside her, fingers loosely intertwined with hers. "I don't have much time left," she murmured, "but I'm not afraid." "You shouldn't be," Ethan whispered. "You'll take care of them?" He nodded slowly, painfully. "Every day, every night, always." Julia turned her head to look at him, her gaze clearer than it had been all week. "You don't have to be perfect, Ethan," she said. "You just have to show up. That's what they need." "I will," he said, his voice cracking. "I swear it." With a soft exhale, she squeezed his hand. "Then I can go peacefully." And that night, she did. The house felt emptier the next morning, but not in the way Ethan had feared. It was more sacred now, like a cathedral echoing with quiet love. He gathered the boys and held them close. "She's gone," he said gently. "She passed in her sleep." They didn't cry, not right away. Instead, they just pressed into him, letting the silence hold them. Eventually, Leo looked up. "Can we still build robots?" Ethan nodded. "We can build anything." A week later, the funeral was small, just as Julia had requested. No black suits, no long eulogies, just sunlight, stories, and the sound of kites in the wind. Ethan stood beside the boys as they each released a kite into the sky. Bright colors Julia would have loved, tail ribbons dancing above the trees. "She's watching," Aiden whispered. "I hope so," Ethan replied, his voice thick. Then Leo turned to him. "Are we still your family?" Ethan dropped to one knee, cupping both boys' faces in his hands. "You are my family," he said firmly. "Forever." They nodded solemnly, trusting him more than he trusted himself. That evening, the boys surprised Ethan with something of their own. On the dining room table, beneath a towel, was a folder marked Dad's New Mission. Inside were crayon drawings, journal entries, even a Lego model of a future invention. "The Ethan Reynolds Center for Robotics and Families," Aiden explained. where kids who love building stuff can go, even if they don't have parents yet. Ethan stared at the materials, overwhelmed. "You want to build a place like that?" asked. "We want to build it with you," Leo said softly. Ethan leaned back, hand on his heart. "And let's get started." The Ethan Reynolds Center for Robotics and Families didn't begin with blueprints or investors. It began on the living room floor, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, with Legos, hot cocoa, and two boys who believed in possibility more than profit. While thunder rolled softly outside, Ethan sat cross-legged between Aiden and Leo, sketching out ideas with a pencil that hadn't touched paper in years. Each line he drew was uncertain, but it felt honest, more real than any presentation he'd ever given in a boardroom. "We should have a room just for robot testing," Aiden said, tapping the paper excitedly. "Like with ramps, tracks, and maybe even a mini obstacle course." Leo leaned in, eyes alight. "And a design studio for kids who don't know how to build yet, but want to learn." Ethan smiled at their enthusiasm. "You two are natural engineers." "No," Aiden said firmly. "We're storytellers. Robots are how we tell stories." That struck Ethan in a place words rarely reached. These boys weren't just dreaming. They were rebuilding the world they had lost, piece by piece. By the following month, the idea had transformed into action. Ethan called in old favors, architects, designers, and educators he'd mentored over the years. He pitched the project not as a business but as a legacy, not his, but Julia's. She believed in creativity and care, he told one group of volunteers. This center will carry both. The design included open labs, reading corners, mentorship spaces, and walls lined with framed child-drawn inventions. It would be a place where children could feel safe to imagine again, even if they came from broken beginnings. But there was one part Ethan insisted on building himself. The tribute room. Tucked in the heart of the center, behind a glass door etched with Julia's name, the tribute room held her original sketch of the family robot, the one she had drawn 9 years ago, folded lovingly inside the letter that never reached him. Beside the sketch stood her final photograph, one Ethan had taken just days before her passing. She was laughing, holding Aiden's clay robot in one hand and Leo's drawing in the other. Life still burned in her eyes. There was also a video screen, looping short clips the boys had chosen themselves. Julia reading bedtime stories, tying shoelaces, dancing badly in the kitchen. Ethan sat in the room sometimes, just to breathe the space she once occupied. It grounded him. One evening, weeks before the center's opening, Aiden asked a question that made Ethan pause. "Are you still going to work on your company too?" Ethan looked up from the circuit board they were soldering together. "Not in the same way. Because of us. Because of you, I finally understand what matters." Leo, who'd been quietly wiring a motor, added, "Does that mean you're our real dad now?" Ethan put his tools down slowly. "I've always wanted to be," he said. "But real dads don't just show up, they stay." The boys glanced at each other, then nodded. They didn't need more words. They already believed him. The day the paperwork finalized, Ethan took the boys out for ice cream. Not at some lavish dessert bar, but at a small stand near the pier, where Julia used to take them when she could afford a treat. The legal adoption was complete. They were, officially, a family. He pulled the documents from his coat pocket and laid them on the table between bites of chocolate swirl. "These mean I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. Leo blinked up at him. "You weren't before either." Ethan smiled, heart aching with love. "But now, the whole world knows it too." As the sun dipped behind the bay, the three of them walked along the dock. "Mom would have loved today," Aiden said suddenly. "She would have made us dress fancier," Leo added. Ethan chuckled. "She would have made me cry with a speech." They stopped at the edge of the dock, staring into the glowing water. Breeze passed, soft and warm. "Do you think she sees us?" Leo asked. "I think," Ethan said, voice trembling, "she's proud of who you are, and who you're helping me become." That night, Ethan tucked the boys into bed and sat between their bunks, telling them stories. Not from books, but from memory. Stories about Julia, about love, mistakes, and redemption. Stories with open endings and hopeful turns. As their breathing evened into sleep, Ethan stayed a moment longer, whispering to the quiet. "Thank you, Julia, for giving me another chance." The grand opening of the Julia Reynolds Robotics Center dawned on a crisp Saturday morning, the sky painted with soft gold and pale blue. Families gathered beneath the string lights that lined the newly paved walkway. Children clutched cardboard robots, and volunteers in matching shirts welcomed guests with genuine smiles. Aiden and Leo stood near the entrance, faces scrubbed clean, hair neatly combed, each wearing a pin with their mother's initials. Inside, a small ceremony was about to begin. Ethan adjusted the microphone nervously. The same man who once commanded international stages with ease, now holding back tears in front of 100 local families. Behind him, a banner stretched across the wall, "Where robots learn to love, and children learn to lead." He took a breath, steadying himself. "Some centers begin with funding," he began, voice firm but soft. "Some with blueprints or business plans. This one began with a letter that never reached me, and 2 boys who reminded me that being brilliant means nothing if you forget how to care." Gasps and gentle murmurs spread through the room as Ethan nodded toward Aiden and Leo. They built this space without realizing it, piece by piece. Every kite, every drawing, every question they asked about gears and wires and their mother brought us here. He paused, eyes shining. "Julia once told me that robots can be programmed to move, but it takes love to teach them why they move. Today, we honor her belief that logic and heart aren't opposites, they're partners." Applause filled the room, not thunderous, but warm and enduring. Then Ethan stepped back and gestured to Leo. With wide eyes and a slight tremble, the boy stepped up to the podium. He clutched a small paper in both hands but didn't read from it. "Hi, my name's Leo," he said, voice high but clear. "And this is my big brother Aiden. We used to build robots on the floor because we didn't have a table. And we used to make noises for them because we didn't have motors." A soft chuckle swept through the crowd. "But then something better than motors showed up," he continued, glancing at Ethan with innocent affection. "Our dad." Ethan blinked hard, heart caught in his throat. Leo lifted a small, palm-sized robot into the air, one he and Aiden had built in secret over the past week. "This robot can move," Leo said, pressing a button that made it roll forward awkwardly. "But it also has a message." He tapped its side and the small speaker crackled to life with a pre-recorded voice. "I don't just walk. I care because my dad taught me how to love." The room fell into a hushed awe. Even the youngest children stilled. Then came the sound of sobs. Quiet, respectful, real. Ethan knelt beside Leo, pulled him into a tight hug, and then opened his arms to Aiden, who rushed into the embrace. It wasn't a picture-perfect moment. It was better. It was honest. Later, after the crowd had dispersed, the family wandered through the halls of the center together. They paused in the tribute room, where Julia's sketch hung in a simple gold frame. Ethan reached out and gently touched the glass. "She's everywhere here," he whispered. "She'd be proud of you," Aiden said. "No," Ethan replied, voice thick. "She'd be proud of you." Outside, the afternoon sun cast a warm light on the new garden, where dozens of colorful kites, Noah's original idea, had been planted like flowers, their tails fluttering in the wind. "I think we should fly one," Leo said suddenly. Without hesitation, Ethan nodded. Let's do it. They picked the brightest one, a patchwork kite made from scraps of Julia's old art projects, and climbed the nearby hill. Aiden ran first, holding the spool. Leo followed close behind, kite in hand. Ethan watched with a swelling heart as it soared into the air, climbing higher and higher until it danced freely in the sky. The boys laughed, wind in their hair, hope in their hearts. Ethan stood at the edge of the hill, arms crossed against his chest. A man transformed, not by wealth nor accolades, but by the quiet, powerful force of redemption. "Fly higher, Julia," he whispered to the sky. "We're here because of you." And as the kite spun above them, silhouetted against the sun, Ethan felt a deep and certain truth settle in his chest. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of everything he never knew he needed.